meeting of the Learning Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Just to confirm, as a council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm that I have not received any notifications or requests to use Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English. I move on then to agenda item 1. Apologies for absence, please, Geraint.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got apologies from councillors Glyn Caron, Raymond Williams, Cathy Evans, Louise Shepherd and Dave Thomas.
Mr Tim James, our legal officer, to advise us on the legal position, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. In relation to any potential declarations of interest, my advice is that, in my view, there are unlikely to be any declarations. If there were any, they would almost certainly be personal only. I'm of that view, members, because the main item on the agenda today, item 5, the School Attainment Report, is a report which relates to attainment at schools throughout the borough. It doesn't focus on any particular individual schools, and therefore it's generic and applies, say, throughout the education sector within the borough. So in my view, even though some of you may have relatives who attend particular schools or may have relatives who work at particular schools or other connections, perhaps as a governor, in my view there's no requirement for any of you to declare a personal interest. If there are any that arise during the meeting that you do wish to declare, I would simply remind members that they need to record that in the attendance register at the appropriate point. But that's my advice, Chair, unless you or any of the other members have any questions for me.
I move on then to agenda item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of September. On page 3, to page 14. Are you happy to accept these as a true record of the meeting? Move on then to item 4, which is the action sheet on page 15. And you can see the action there. Have you all received the response that was emailed out to you? Any questions? Are you happy with that? Thank you very much. And then to item 5 on page 17, which is school attainment. Can we welcome Sharon Davis and Julian Doroshnik to give us a brief outline of the school attainment and the key issues, please?
If I could address the bullet points on the screen. Rebecca and I have been in constant communication regarding the report and what to be discussed during this meeting as well. If we look at the key activity undertaken in last year to deliver improvements, some of it is addressed in the report as well. The key, if we look at Key Stage 4, the key elements for us was when the 2016 results came in, 4 of our schools had an unexpected dip. So the first thing we did was hold summit meetings with the 4 of those schools. They were within the first 2 weeks coming back in that September term. So that would have been autumn, September 2016. And the purpose of those meetings were for the school to have conducted their own investigations, as they would have in any case over the provisional summer results, and then to give us, to feed back to us then as a local authority with the EAS, because we had done our investigations as well to see exactly why the schools had experienced those unexpected dips. So we had the 4 schools which we have reported on in a previous report. for those schools, and from those meetings then, some of the schools were categorised as red schools and some of the schools were categorised as yellow schools. For those categorised as red, they were also Schools Challenge Cymru schools, so had monthly AIB meetings. As a local authority, because Schools Challenge Cymru was coming to an end in the following March, we worked with Welsh Government, because Welsh Government were the key people that determined Schools Challenge Cymru. We work with them through EAS to have a transition period, and therefore the AIB meetings turned into intervention panel meetings, but were more were agendaed by us as a local authority in conjunction with EAS rather than Welsh Government challenge advisors, and we were able to have that earlier rather than wait until the March. That meant that on the agenda items then during these monthly meetings, we were then able to one, control the agenda, but also put things on there like exclusions, attendance, as well as have very detailed progress reports. We had members of the schools, heads of departments coming in, feeding in on developments in the English department, in maths departments and in the key departments, alongside EAS subject lead colleagues, and where concerns or issues were raised, we were able then to put in additional support or come to a conclusion together on what support and what next steps those schools needed. Likewise with EIB, schools that had EIB meetings, they were amber schools. They also had bespoke support plans for those schools, and because we had those in a monthly meeting, we were able then to provide a high level of support for those, a detailed bespoke level of support. So any concerns or issues that were coming to those meetings throughout the year, we were able then to adjust the support and address those concerns as and when they arose. So that led to some of the key improvements that we experienced then in the summer term with our provisional results. And likewise with our primary schools, we also had schools that were red, were under a very similar process. They had intervention panel meetings and a monthly meeting where myself, EAS colleagues, the exec member and the Chief Education Officer with the head teacher and the chair of governors sit around the table on a monthly during monthly meetings with looking at their bespoke plans, and again any concerns and issues that do come are raised, we're able to identify, address and put next steps in place. And we believe that's led to some of the improvements that we've seen this year. So hopefully that's clarified some of that. There is reference to it in the report. If we look at the this one is a key one, key activity undertaken to prepare for curriculum changes. There have been and there will be continued more curriculum changes, specifically at Key Stage 4. Last year, and again it's referred to in the report, that the key changes that had outcomes on this summer's results was English language. There were 2 maths exams, one maths, one numeracy exam. I'll just, my mind's gone blank, I need to refer. Yes, please. Oh, yeah.
The main changes to the measures this year were, it was the last year for BTEC Science to count. English language only, not literature. But the English course was brand new, as were the 2 maths courses in mathematics and mathematics numeracy. Schools did suffer from a general lack of information from the exam boards. They didn't know where the benchmark boundaries actually were. They were only given 1 exemplar paper to look at and work on. So there was a national expectation that results would go down across Wales as a consequence of that, and that did sort of come through in most of the part. In terms of the activity to undertake and prepare for it, all our teams for the EAS for English and Maths work rigorously with the schools to approach the new skills-based curriculum and the new skills questions. And in fact, as it turned out, of the performance across Wales, 4 out of the 5, I can't use the word top performing local authorities, but certainly the authorities that took the smallest hit or decrease in standards, 4 out of the 5 were in the EAS, and in fact Torfaen itself took the fourth smallest decrease in standards out of all the 22 unitary authorities. And that is, a lot of that is as a consequence of the work that the English and the maths teams had prepared the schools with. Going forward, there is a further expectation this year, because there are more changes. Science BTEC will no longer count. So it'll be GCSE science. So you can expect your level 2 science results to decrease sharply in Torfaen, and that'll be mirrored across Wales. And that is also, I'll pick up on that when we go through the actual outcomes this year as well for the level 2. The level 2 measure has been very drastically hit by only allowing 2 BTEC exams, whereas before you could do a whole range of them. So, and the other big change this year coming forward, so when you get your results in the summer, is of course that one of the key measures now will be the Welsh Baccalaureate at level 2, which is the national level, and the level 3, which will be the A-level equivalent of it. There is a foundation level as well, but the national level includes skills challenge, which interestingly counted in this year's statistics for a level 2, so sorry to complicate things even further. But the Welsh Baccalaureate is made up of a load of individual skills challenge activities that the pupils can do, and then a big project, which all schools are currently doing now. And it is very wide-ranging. Pupils pick their own title, and then they have to research it. It's a 2,000-word project, basically, and then that gets marked as part of the process. And, of course, in with the Welsh Baccalaureate measure, it comes either of the maths and the English as well. So you have to achieve, to get the level 2 national, you actually have to achieve a level 2 equivalent in either the maths or the maths numeracy, and English language or Welsh first language for our pupils in Gwyntlew. So that was the big one, the big changes coming forward, but there are changes then further down the line as well. So nothing is going to remain the same. So it will make comparisons when we actually move on, Chair, to the looking at the performance this year compared to previous years. You cannot compare trends. If you have a look at the All Wales Code data set for every single school in Wales, there's a very neat dotted line drawn down between this year's and last year's, because you cannot compare, because they're not the same anymore. So you can only talk about the performance this year compared to previous years, so you have to talk about it in isolation, unfortunately. I don't know if there are any questions around that, Chair. Shall I move on to Schools Challenge Cymru? I think Sharon's alluded to it. Obviously, Schools Challenge Cymru funding stopped for our schools, for the 40 schools across Wales, and for our individual schools in Torfaen at March the 31st. Our 3 Schools Challenge Cymru schools now are actually, I'm the challenge advisor for as well. So what's been the PCA for Torfaen, I have direct responsibility for Westmont, Cwbran High, and with Abersychan, we've got Roger Davis, who's a challenge advisor in there, but I liaise very closely with him on those. So there's not much more you can say about Schools Challenge Cymru other than the money's finished. Shall I move on to the next one? Yeah. Yeah. The PDG one, you can only really consider on an individual school basis, because the deprivation grant and the education improvement grant, which schools get, are based on obviously the individual numbers of pupils eligible for free school meals based in those schools. They can change throughout the year. Children come on and off the register, but each school will have a very specific plan, which has to be. The interesting thing is the funding starts in the new financial year in April, so you're working across 2 financial years with it. So the process, though, just to inform this committee, is all grant funding has to have a plan submitted alongside an evaluation of the prior year's expenditure. There's a very rigid format that we have to go through to make sure that the plan that the school hands in actually meets all the criteria and is being spent in the right areas. And then in January now, at the end of January, we'll do our first trawl of progress against the plan. If I can just give you some examples, because quite often talking about an example is easier. For instance, this is a primary school activity, but we've actually got, in this particular school, I won't name the school, but the plan actually includes how it's going to address the attendance in particular families, so they're called Family A, Family B, and it's around weekly meetings, the employment of a home liaison officer to actually go out and deal with that. And then what we'll do, they'll track the attendance of those individual pupils, so the evidence would be in the attendance. For some schools, it's around performance, of improving pupils' reading ages. In secondary, obviously, you would expect it to be around free school meals, pupils, and then it can be in outcomes, or it could be improving performance in national reading tests or national maths tests, and they will be the measure. Or again, it could be identifying Year 7 pupils, in particular pertinent for secondary schools. You have to have a reading age of 9 years 6 months to be what they call a functional reader to access the Key Stage 3 curriculum. So no matter what levels you've got, if you can't read over and above 9.6 months, most of the Key Stage 3 curriculum you won't be able to access. So a lot of secondary schools spend it on reading recovery schemes and tracking it. So Cwmbran High, for instance, is one where they're doing that as we speak. They've got all the baseline figures, and now the interventions are going in under the various reading schemes, so that's how it gets tracked. So any correlation between PDG and attainment, you couldn't do it on a global authority basis, because literally every school is doing something slightly different with a different number of pupils to achieve a different aim. So you'd have to talk about individual schools in that case. And some schools, for instance, Henclase, with such low free school meal numbers, they get hardly anything. They literally get pence compared to some other schools who are getting many thousands. So it's not at all clear. You'd have to pick. And what I would suggest moving forward, Chair, if you wanted to, you just randomly sample some school names and then say, you could ask me, right, what are they doing with the plan, or what the progress has been. And if you're going to do that, I would suggest after January the 31st, when we've got the progress check. I think we've mentioned the secondary school performance indicators. I don't know what they mean by the evaluation there, Chair. Is that the report itself, or
the process of how you evaluate the indicators and what you do following that evaluation?
So it's the data analysis.
Yeah.
It's gone off. On results day in secondary schools, we receive what we call the initial results form. It's called Good Old Education. It's called a triple SP. But basically, it's just a one-sided form with all the results on. Yeah. Then what we do is as an organisation, we take all that information and then we plot it on a spreadsheet like that for the authority, and it actually goes down to how many pupils and percentages compares to last year's performance. So you can start to see trends over time, which unfortunately this year is meaningless because of the new qualifications. And then schools that are identified, because we have a process called it's progress towards targets. So the targets are set, agreed and signed off by the local authority. So the schools will set the targets. The challenge advisor goes in, works with the schools to set the targets against Welsh Government data. Then I check all the targets for the secondary schools. Then they go through to the local authority, who are encouraged then to check. And what we do then is schools who have underperformed compared to their last progress check, because we check them in December. In March is the important check, because that's where the free school meals pupil progress comes out in March. And then again in June. So it gives schools an opportunity that they may well have set an ambitious target, but they've done interventions, and maybe, you know, it's worked for some, haven't for others. So the idea is they inform us, so nothing comes as a shock. And as long as they can justify at an individual pupil level, you know, they put the interventions in, and either for attendance, ill health, or for whatever reasons, you know, it hasn't worked, then we amend the targets down. So, classic example, we've got one secondary school who actually set very ambitious targets initially, underperformed by around 10% against those targets, but very early on, as the interventions didn't work, we were informed, and finally they were actually less than 1% off what they said they were going to get in the summer, when the results actually came out. So it proves that, you know, the tracking systems for those schools are robust. So that's the process. It's a process of continual checking. And for schools, as Sian has already alluded to, who are either amber or red at the Education Improvement Board meetings, they're monthly meetings, and every one of those meetings the school has to present a progress report against the targets, whether they're on track. If they're not on track, why not? Which pupils? What are the reasons why? So it's a very sort of rigorous, robust process at an individual level.
And just to add to that, what Julian's just alluded to there, is during this autumn term, when we're doing the target setting, we can then use in the October meetings, in the intervention panel meetings for the red schools and the EIB meetings for the amber schools, we're able then to have those honest, transparent conversations with our schools surrounding their targets, where we can challenge face to face, or we've asked previously, and we have those discussions surrounding targets, and therefore we can sign those targets off during that meeting. There's no to-ing and fro-ing. The evidence is there, we look at it, and we come to a decision collectively around that table then on their targets, ready to be signed off officially in December when we send the form in.
So, are you confident now then that the tracking is robust? Because we've had sort of several meetings where we've had assurances about the tracking, so you're quite happy now that going forward the tracking is on target?
The tracking in previous years, sort of 2 years ago, it was an issue. The tracking is now sufficiently rigorous and robust. The variation comes in basically the changes to the curriculum and the measures, and how schools effectively work towards those. As I said, it was very difficult in English. Some schools managed it. Others didn't. You know, we had one school which took a particular dip, as we'll see in a moment, in the English level 2, which impacted negatively on the level 2+. We know the reasons why. Sian's already alluded to that in terms of the summit meetings, because it's not necessarily in this school as well. It was also around staffing issues that had arisen within English. You know, there were long-term absence. There was actually a bereavement within the department. There's all sorts of things as well which can impact on pupils' preparations, unfortunately. But the tracking systems certainly are robust now. We had 20 across the region. We had 22 out of 36 schools actually less than 3% away from their targets. The year before, it was the other way around. You know, so schools are getting much better at doing it. And
also, when we're looking at the tracking, yes, it's great to have those robust data systems in place, but what we're finding now through these monthly meetings is that not only are we better at asking the right questions as an LA, but the schools now are asking themselves, their middle leaders, their senior leaders, are asking relevant key members of staff who are inputting that data. Because what we were finding in the past was actually they had schools had decent tracking systems, but it's like anything. If you went to the wrong data in, you're not going to get the right data out. What we're finding now is that schools are far better. The leadership, the SLT within the schools now have tightened up on that robustness. And also, I'm sure, as you all know, if you remember the governing bodies, I think governing bodies are far better at asking the right questions during key key points within the governing body meetings and during the head teacher's report is about everybody having that responsibility and asking the right and appropriate questions, challenging as well as supporting, because there's a reason to challenge is to know, okay, well, if this is an issue or concern, what are we going to do about it? What are the next steps? How can we resolve it? What additional support do we need? And I think over the last 2 years we've worked very well with EAS and with our schools at being able then to make sure as much as we can that that support is as bespoke to that school and that it's not a generic package that one size fits all. Any other questions?
The only part I just realised I've omitted to mention, Chair, is further plan changes to the curriculum. Of course, is secondary schools are now going to have to deliver full course GCSE Welsh to all pupils, even in the English medium sector. And that is going to be a significant issue because most schools are barely staffed to deliver short course. So I genuinely don't know where secondary schools are going to get the expertise to be able to deliver full course, because you're basically doubling the timetable allocation for Welsh language. So they're going to have to be pinching hours from other subjects somewhere to get it in, because it's got to be a minimum of 4 hours, 2 hours a week, 4 hours a fortnight. But we know that if those of you are governors, the difficulty in just recruiting Welsh language teachers in the first instance. And now every school in Wales is going to be looking for additional Welsh staffing to be able to serve that. So that's just something that you need to be aware of moving forward.
What is the timeline for that then, do we know?
They'll be assessed, they'll be part of the key measures in the upcoming September. Also, whilst we're on curriculum changes, I would just like to highlight that as well as changes at Key Stage 4, there are huge changes at Key Stage 5 with A levels as well. So schools are not just having to think, oh, we've just got GCSEs to worry about. For schools with sixth forms as well, it's a big problem. It's a huge concern for them that they've also got big changes in A levels as well. So it's sweeping across the board there.
Can you tell us then what you're doing to help with those changes? What's the EAS doing and what are we doing as a local authority to help schools with these changes?
I think it has been recognised. I was at a meeting yesterday, this was more in connection with A levels, with various people from Welsh Government, WJEC, Qualified Wales, and I think there has been a recognition that amongst all these changes, one, there's a lot of changes going across the board. Two, that maybe schools haven't been privy to resource materials as quickly as they should have, especially in the Welsh language, because they've needed to be translated. They haven't always had the access to these resources as quickly as they should have. That has been recognised and is being rectified. So all new changes, we've been reassured that the resource materials are there for schools now, and any new materials and training for teachers as well, that's all been accounted for and they are available through consortia and through various websites that schools can go direct to as well. And obviously through EAS, as soon as the changes are coming in, they're working with our schools to ensure that they have the right resources, that they know exactly what the changes are, what the benchmarkings are, as and when that's available.
Councillor Preston, sorry.
Thank you. I just wonder why there was such a disparity between the Torfaen schools and the percentage of pupils achieving level 2 inclusive. Some schools fared far better than others. We knew the changes were coming, so why that disparity?
Sorry, am I not on? Sorry. In regards to the maths, equally, you had maths numeracy, you had maths, the maths as well. Again, an unknown, and although we had the early entries, we had some schools that entered for one, some schools had entered for all, so it was still an unknown picture for us. Where schools were able to had the better scores, as Julian said, we were able to, they were red or amber schools, and because of these monthly meetings, our one school, for example, to do with English intervention, EAS, that the challenge advisor had been in, and it had been reported back to us that the intervention wasn't going as well. When we queried further, there had been, it was to do with the timetabling, there was a clash with different things going on in the school. We were able to resolve that really quickly, and therefore the pupils were able to access the intervention as well. So it was having a very clear handle, working with the schools to ensure that if they were offering intervention, the intervention was appropriate, and that pupils were able to access that intervention as well. And through having subject leads there as well, we were able to have a very honest and transparent conversation with certain members of staff around those tables. Again, the school that had the significant dip was a yellow school. However, it wasn't, as Julian alluded, there was staff absences, there was a bereavement, there was lots of other things going on in the background as well that accounted for some of the robustness of monitoring of that subject. Moving forward this year, we've recognised that, and that we're having half-termly meetings with this school, because we did have a summit meeting. We're having half-termly meetings with that school, and then we do have another school that's consistently performing well. However, we're not leaving anything to chance. There's changes within that school, a new head teacher. We are monitoring through the PCA, through the CAs, looking at that school very closely as well, so that we're not leaving it to chance, if that makes sense.
I think to give you a bit of context for that as well, that the school we're alluding to, 22 pupils, when they received their first set of results, were 1 mark off a C. They were all submitted for remarking, and 1 went up. So, it's sometimes it's an issue with a brand new exam as well. But I think the disappointing thing for me with that school is that the Key Stage 4 lead is actually a senior examiner for the WJEC. And my bone of contention in the summit meeting was they should have been one of the best prepared schools in the whole of Wales. Shall I say that the quality of advice given by this person, however, was poor, surprisingly.
I don't think it's appropriate to bring it up at this point, because I missed the finance committee meeting from my school last week, but it obviously relates to attainment. Is the budgets in some secondary schools are coming desperately tight, and I'm hearing that word again. We're going to getting down to increased class sizes sooner or later, and that instant knock on with attainment. As Julian alluded to, with the Welsh full course coming in next year, where is the finance going to come from to strengthen the Welsh departments in the English medium schools to deliver that effectively?
Again, we're facing further cuts to grants this year to the EIG. It was reported to the head teachers meeting that I believe it's an 11% cut this year with a 9% cut next year, so that's a 20% cut then from Welsh Government to the EIG. We understand your frustrations, and we're working with the schools, our finance departments. We're looking at various grants, working with the schools to ensure that progress doesn't get a hit, even though budgets are.
One final question I'm on that subject as well is that, again, it's proven links to attainment and pupil outcomes is the standard of buildings in the north. As one councillor found out last week, very old, very tired buildings on both secondary schools in the north of the borough. It is going to have an impact on pupils' well-being and what they aspire to and achieve in those schools. Is there any plans in the medium long term to deal with that, with increasingly tight budgets and the desperate lack of money going into these schools?
We've got the 21st Century Schools plan that has been approved by Welsh Government. On Band A, we've achieved everything that we needed to. Band B, now we're awaiting approval there to see. I understand your frustrations, but I also think as well that schools, it's about having a rolling programme, and I totally get that the bulk of it has to be on attainment, and the bulk of school budgets goes on staffing to get the right staff in for attainment, but it's also about managing the budget and trying where you can to have a rolling programme, and I think that's where some of our schools have been not caught out, but there's been a shortfall in the maintenance of buildings going forward.
Can I just say that 21st Century Schools is on our work programme, and it is something that we will be looking at as soon as we can as a scrutiny team. John, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. My questions will relate to Level 2 Plus Inclusive, so you know what I'm going to talk about. The first thing I'd like you to establish with me, because I'm slightly confused, is what are the actual figures for the Level 2 Plus Inclusive? Because I'm seeing a couple of sets of figures here. So I just need to know what...
We've been told yesterday at this meeting that the verified figures will be out next week on December the 6th. So all the figures that you see before are provisional. There are different cuts during the term, having had this term, where figures are updated, as Julian said, down to resets and those coming in, remarks and everything. So depending on when the report was written, we might have had other sets of provisional data since then. So in the report, it would have been the first... 50%. Since then, we've had other provisional data since the report has been written that puts Torfaen at 51.2%. But obviously, we have to have a cut-off point as when the report was written. And that's still provisional until it's verified. We've been told that the date is December the 6th from Welsh Government. It shouldn't go down, no, but it could increase, we don't know.
So the 2015 figure, 16 figure, got 53.5, so is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so it's only a small decline.
Yeah.
And the forward in 15 is 56.7, so it's gone, 2 years has gone from 56.7 to 51.2.
Yes.
For improving. It says on, let's have a look, 6.9, strengthen and moderation of teacher assessment. Could you outline to me what will that mean? Does that mean in the classroom for teachers?
Our councillors, our clusters of schools, 2 years ago, we did a piece of work with all our schools on moderation, and we had a moderation workshop, and from that we agreed on a Torfaen common approach to moderation. So not only did it have what the statutory responsibility was, but they were also looking beyond that and looking at clusters. Our clusters are getting far, far better at not just doing the statutory responsibility of moderation, but they're taking it far beyond that and looking throughout moderation throughout the year. They're getting a more standardised version of moderation and standards within clusters. They're not just looking at secure levels, they're looking at those that are borderline levels, especially when you're looking at primaries, and it involves primaries and secondary colleagues. And that's something that we're celebrating in Torfaen because our schools are getting much, much better. What that means in the classroom then is that our teachers will have a better understanding of what the skills they need, skills learners need to get that particular level or to get that particular attainment. And within that fine level, it's looking at, okay, what is a 4B? What skills do they need for a 4B piece of writing? So they're really drilling down.
Yeah, the whole issue with everything around teacher assessment is it is exactly that. 2 years ago, the Welsh Government introduced what they called the STAT project, which was an external moderation at sort of Welsh Government level of teacher assessment versus national test outcomes. And it also included an element around the moderation of the portfolios. It's a 10% random sampling of schools in clusters. So you're always going to get the variation because of the accountability model. And that's not just in Torfaen, that's across Wales. The whole accountability model, will allow for instance, if you take English expected level 4+ in a primary school, well, it's actually around reading, oracy and writing. So if you've got, if you've got a pupil who is a 5 in writing and a 5 in reading and a 4 in oracy, they'll come through as a 5. There is no fine levelling as well. And what we're finding at the moment is to access the Key Stage 3 curriculum, you need a reading age of 9 years, 6 months. I've already alluded to that. So they can actually come through. If they come through on a level 5 overall for English into a secondary school, if you track that forward with the expected 2 levels of progress at Key Stage 3 and 1 at 4, they're actually your grade B minimum pupils. And your level 4 pupils, if you add 2 levels, that should mean that at the end of Key Stage 3, so the end of year 9, they should be level 6. And then add another level, level 7, so they should be getting your level 2, your A stars to C's. That's not happening. Okay? It's not happening, not being critical of any sector, but it's the accountability model. And until that changes, you know, we've spoken about this many, many times with Welsh Government, that the model is flawed. Okay? So, whichever way you do it, because if I wanted to be an unscrupulous secondary head and I wanted to improve my performance at Key Stage 3 to above, what they call above the median, so into the top half of similar schools, you can add 2 or 3% without really doing anything different if you wanted to, and it would not be found out. In the same way, not that I'm saying that it's happening, but these are the types of flaws that you can get in the system, in the same way that with a moderation exercise, if you moderate the portfolios and agree that, yes, this is a grade 4 or a level 4 piece of work, and then you take that back into your primary school, or if it's a level 6 piece of work, you take it back into your secondary schools, are all of the level 6 and all the level 4s of a similar level? Or are some of them given the benefit of the doubt, you know? Oh yeah, he's a really bright lad, he works well in his maths and everything, so yeah, we give him the benefit of the doubt and we'll give him... Yeah, so the system is flawed. And I make no pretense to that.
Okay, so could you give me some examples then of some of the improvement strategies that you will be putting into secondaries to try to improve outcomes at level 2+?
Right, here we go. Basically, we've just delegated funding to all secondary school clusters to work on a cluster basis, so that the days of the quick fixes are gone. Schools Challenge Cymru is a quick fix stick in plaster. You know, it's a bit like playing private lessons for everybody in year 11. We're not going to get the maths, or private lessons only in English. We're not going to get the English. Those days are gone because the money's not there. There are also only so many mornings and afternoons where you can keep children either get them in early, keep them after school, or so many Saturday mornings where you can run intervention classes. Once you've exhausted all that, at the end of the day, it just comes back to good quality teaching of the appropriate skills. That's what it's about. So the focus now is very much moving away from the very expensive interventions in Year 11. Now, don't get me wrong, they still have to happen, because I'm fairly confident you wouldn't be happy if all your secondary schools stopped doing that this year and the results dipped. So they've still got to do that. But at the same time, they are now going back in with primary cluster partners and in Key Stage 3. Key Stage 3 in most secondary schools for years has been the forgotten 3 years. I'm an ex-secondary head myself, so I can speak from experience. Because we weren't challenged over it. We weren't theoretically not measuring it. Estin don't even look at it when they inspect the school. Your standards are Key Stage 3, it's all about Key Stage 4. So what you do, you should concentrate on Key Stage 4. Now, however, the question that you're asking, to get the sustainable improvement, and because the new qualifications are all based on skills, it's about what GCSE skills can I start teaching in Year 7 or even in Year 6 and build on those as we go into 8, 9, 10 and forward. So what are we doing about it as a consortium? Most of your secondary schools, by the end of the spring term, will have had a Key Stage 3 curriculum review done by us, along with the school. So we're actually looking at where the schools are in terms of how their curriculum matches the skills requirements for GCSE, how they monitor the progress in skills. There's going to be an awful lot of work and support going on with that. We're trying to get the secondary schools to alter their self-evaluation processes to focus on pupils' progress in skills as well. So things like the new learning walks, instead of just doing book scrutiny, it's book scrutiny with learner interviews. I can go into quite a lot of detail. I mentioned the cluster working. I'll use Westmont as a classic example. Westmont's cluster plan this year, really, really effective. They're working with their primary schools, teachers across the divide on joint planning of lessons using the best skills that are available in primary schools, but also making the primary schools acutely aware that if a child does come through with a level 4, you're actually, for me, in the secondary school, that means they're going to be at least a C. If they're coming through with a 5, what it actually means for a secondary school is that should be an A student. So are you genuinely telling me that this person you have just given a 5 to, irrespective, we can have the 6-week break in between, which quite often, sometimes we talk about we forget a lot over the 6 weeks. Well, I don't forget to ride a bike if I haven't ridden one for 6 weeks. So there's a lot of things though, and what I'm really, really pleased with, because I go into an awful lot of secondary schools, and I'm in your secondary schools an awful lot at the moment. They have now realised this, and there is a huge shift. If you're not a governor in a secondary school, and you want to do something worthwhile, go into your secondary schools and see how the shift in attitude towards pupils' progress in skills and what they're doing to robustly measure it, track its progress, and put in the intervention at Key Stage 3. There's no point in putting intervention in Year 11 because they're failing their English, if they haven't got the writing skills or the oracy skills, because you're trying to give them those skills and get them to pass the exam at the same time. You need to identify them in Year 7, and then put the intervention in Year 7, and then those who don't respond, we put a little bit more in Year 8, and then a little bit more in Year 9, so the vast majority. Now that's where we are. We're currently at the stage now that those are being implemented as we sit here, and have been implemented in a lot of secondary schools.
So you tell me that nobody's ever real.
I think.
Yes, you do that.
Yeah. What I'm actually telling you, because basically we don't run the schools. The accountability model in Wales has been schools stand and fall, schools go into special measures on their Key Stage 4 outcomes. So therefore, the focus has always been, you put your best teachers in Key Stage 4. Well, why not put them in Year 7 and get them all up to that level? So now, I think the penny has finally started to drop with Welsh Government as well. The accountability model was flawed. Schools have worked towards that accountability model. It hasn't worked. And now we've got to do something different. They've done this in England a couple of years ago. They've found some difficulties with the changes they've made in England. It's not the perfect system. But I've always been an advocate myself of, you know, the 3 to 16 school is almost your perfect scenario. Unless you're going to do that, though, what you actually need is to work with your cluster, so that you are almost having the approach that those pupils, when they enter that primary school, where are they going to be at the end of year 11 in a secondary school? How are we going to support each other to do it? How are we going to work with the families? How are we going to work with the teachers in these schools so that we get a consistency in approach to teaching and development? And it wasn't a case of schools didn't realise, because obviously they're very intelligent people. It was a case of it wasn't measured and therefore wasn't important.
And just to back up what Julian says, our schools are far, far better at working within clusters with primary and secondary colleagues. There's far more cluster grants available now and school-to-school working, because, quite rightly, the budgets are getting smaller and smaller. And what they're realising is they need those frills activities as well as the intervention, and the way to do that then is through school to school, looking at how they can use each other's learning to better the learners in their schools. And hopefully that ties up again, it links very nicely with the moderation questions you were asking earlier. How does that affect in the classroom? It is through those cluster workings that it's not just going to cover one element, it should have a knock-on effect on pupils' learning across the board.
Can I ask what we're doing to look at the national tests and the literacy and numeracy, primaries? What interventions are we putting in place and how are we doing it?
There are changes to the national tests. I believe they're coming out this year. Again, they're to be used as a diagnostic tool and not a tool to assess. Teacher assessment will still be the main accountability measure. And because of that, we have to use teacher assessment. The national tests are there for schools to use as a diagnostic tool so that they can look at the data and then put the next steps in alongside another range of data, as in schoolwork, as in learning walks, pupil voices. It's about looking at the whole picture within a school so that the next steps for that learner is being catered for.
The other thing as well, Chair, is last year, if you look at the various LA annexes around the consortium, last year's Torfaen LA annex was the focus on the Torfaen reading scheme in the primary schools, where we had 3 hubs, or 3 schools who were very strong on the teaching of reading and so on. They were used then as hubs to work with other schools, 3 schools each, who had been identified where the reading was very weak for a range of reasons. And they worked together last year. Now, the results of those are available. I'm not even sure if they've come through to scrutiny yet.
No, they haven't. That's my next question, actually. What improvement did we see in those?
The figures I don't have. In fact, hang on. If you give me a minute, I've got the actual data here. But there were improvements. And what we're encouraging secondary schools to do now as well is to retest the reading age, because what the national tests do is they give you 2 figures within statistical margins for sort of the average reader, so it goes from 84, and then you've got the 116 pluses. But that doesn't always equate to reading ages. So what we're actually encouraging secondary schools is to use a standardised test, and in some clusters they're actually looking to use that standardised test in addition to the national test as well, so that they can actually see what reading ages pupils are transferring on as well, so that they can get interventions done earlier. But let me think. I'm just trying to find that report. If you want to give me 2 minutes to find that and move on to the next question, I'll come back, Chair. I can give you some figures.
Councillor Preston, sorry.
Yeah, just looking at the national tests and moving on from what Councillor Thomas said, when you look at the results there, 4 out of the 5 LAs in the CAS consortium are relatively low. You know, is there an issue across the region? You know, it just seems to me just the 4 of the 5.
You've got high. The thing is, where you've got high age of deprivation, you know, pupils are not coming to school reading. You know, they don't read books at home, and therefore they're coming in almost disadvantaged in terms of their baseline from where they're starting from. So for a lot of primary schools, you know, you can have an intake in a year, and the disparity between one end of the ability and the other range can be massive. So that, you know, right from the word go, you're almost on individual learning plans for some of these primary schools, and then that just perpetuates through and through, because you can do so much when the child is in school, but then if it goes home to, you know, and that's the whole thing around FSM, or one of the thinking behind FSM, around that, it's, you know, it's built into deprivation factors to what you experience at home. If you look at, I've just got the data now.
So whilst Julian's doing that, we've got pockets of communities or schools where they work really well within areas you know, their communities are in areas of deprivation, and they work really well with their communities, getting family learning in, educating their parents, and doing as much as they can as well. But again, as I say, it's pockets, it's looking at you'll get some parents from some communities who are open to this, and others, no matter what you try, they just don't want to take that help, whether it's from the school, whether it's from other agencies. That we have some families who are working with Families First, Flying Start, various sorts of other agencies within, and sometimes some families have said, no, I don't want to. Schools can do as much as they can, but as Julian said, if the baseline is very low in the first place, not just in regards to reading, to be able to access reading, you need to communicate, you need to have those social skills. And what we're finding is that our learners are coming in from not having what we would class as essential skills, you know, those key communication, socialising skills coming in. As I said, we are doing bits of work through Flying Start, through various other organisations and partners working with these families, but also it's an ongoing process.
Can I just ask on that then? What are we doing as a local authority to enhance what Communities First and Families First are doing? We put quite a lot of money last year in the budget for early interventions, and has the Education Department been bidding for any money to do something different with those schools? I take it the Family First and Communities First, but are there any sort of innovative things that they could be doing?
We are working, we are looking to see what's working in these areas. I believe the funding didn't come into education, however, we are looking to see what in the Flying Start areas and Community First areas, to see what we can then learn from those areas. What are working really well? Is it parenting groups? Is it various baby and toddler groups? Looking at early transition, because we're fully aware that the sooner we can work with these families, then hopefully if we put the intervention and the support in earlier, therefore that should be a cost productive, and not just cost productive, it's about hitting the families, supporting them very early on, and not later on where sometimes that's too late.
I say, you said the money didn't come into the education budget, but there was a pot of money put in the budget for early interventions. Surely you've got the evidence that there is early intervention needed there.
We've done a piece of work that we are looking at with early interventions, and through the early years team they've bidded for various officers within that. They weren't successful. We are looking at various different things throughout, as I said, so that we can use the evidence that we're using in Flying Start, where we are able to, where parents are, we are able to support parents, and looking how can we then across Torfaen try and replicate or even tweak what we are doing and replicate that across the whole borough. That is a piece of work we are looking at now, and also it's not just budgetary implications, it's trying to get a clear picture of what that looks like.
Thanks, that's useful. Are we looking outside of the EAS? Are we looking further afield and learning, over the border, wherever it might be, elsewhere in Wales? Are we looking at what other areas with similar demographics are doing, where they are achieving, schools that are achieving? Are we looking at that and taking lessons and looking at unique opportunities, like it said, innovative, something different, thinking outside of the box, really? Because, we seem to be sauntering along and we need to think outside of that box because, all the while children need to be progressing.
We actually go outside the region very, very regularly. If we don't have the perceived expertise, for want of a better phrase, we've brought people in from all over England where there's good practice highlighted, whether it be North Wales or whatever. In fact, this project, whilst it's not a Torwen project, we initiated this with Caerphilly because the Caerphilly schools had gone up to the Midlands and seen it. So, and just to give you some figures, so for instance, Mainly Primary, National Reading Test progress from 2014 to 2016 went up from 78.8 to 84.8. Pontynewydd from 68.6 to 84.2. St Julian's, St David's, 79.2, 83.7. Nankellin 63.5 to 85%. Blenheim, interestingly, went down. So, it's not a success story across the piece. But you can begin to see the impact that it's having. The other thing with the national reading test scores as well is, whilst it is a national reading test, how it's administered can vary from school to school.
So what are we doing to ensure consistency across our schools? If you're saying it can vary, what are we doing as an authority and as the EAS to ensure consistency?
Basically, part of the national categorisation report, if you have a look, are you a governor in a school?
Very new governor.
Right. If you have a look at the when the categorisation report gets fed back to you, there has to be a comment in there about the correlation between teacher assessment levels and national test outcomes. And basically what actually happens is that can actually become a determining factor in lowering the categorisation or raising the support level of the school. Normally within 5% is acceptable because one is an on-the-day test and the other one is a measure over a number of years. So you're not really comparing like with like. And as Sharon alluded to as well, the idea of the National Reading Test, it's a diagnostic tool. It's not meant to be a performance measure. But it does tell you a lot about where the school's thinking is, or the teacher's thinking is compared to outcomes in national tests. So it is part of the national categorisation for all schools, whether they be secondary or primary. There will be a comment or one line in the step 2 commentary, so have a look out for it in your school.
And just coming back about do we go further afield, myself and Tracy Peat, who's the head of pupil support and ALN, earlier in the year we visited Ceredigion because the Chief Education Officer for Ceredigion was a member on our recovery board. He's now moved on from Ceredigion, but there was deemed to be good practice going on there. And just looking at a range of things, how were the relationship they have with their schools, their tracking progress, looking at a range of things to see, well, how can we then bring that learning back and use it in our own authority?
What about the class sizes, the children? Like, what is it in junior school? What's the maximum?
In Key Stage 2, there isn't a maximum as such. The ratios are more for your foundation phase. Admittedly, that's going to be a problem. We're looking at budgets moving forward, and I know some of our secondary schools, for example, in one in particular, because
I would have thought some of the kids would slip under. Like, a lot of children are not as good as others, and they muck about the back of the class. Are they being picked up?
Primary is different. So if I talk about primary, then say obviously primary, you've got those children in front of you for the year, and you are the one person who does everything for them. So theoretically, it's more difficult for a child to fall through the net, if you want, for want of a better description. Secondary school, of course, because they have so many different teachers and they rotate around. That comes down then to the individual school's policy. Do they set? Do they keep it mixed ability? Do they set? At which point do they set? And quite often secondary schools will make the higher ability sets the bigger ones. So you put, maybe 36 of your best mathematicians into set 1, so that your very lowest set ability set then might only have 14, 15 or whatever. But, that depends on, obviously, the role in the school. So there's variation around that. As Sharon said, I think it does come back to the quality of the teacher. I've seen some teachers absolutely phenomenal with large sets. And if you applied that simply to a bit of primary logic, most primary classes are up around 30. And yet, they make good progress on the whole there. I think where it does come in is where, coming back in some ways to the earlier comment as well, if you've got a really old building and you are now getting full to capacity, and you've got large class sizes and small classrooms, then it can become a physical barrier sometimes to literally get around everybody, because literally I got 3 desks across the back of the class and I can't get into that corner unless I start climbing over pupils and chairs. Now there it can be an issue, but there would be ways, there's always ways to get around things. My own gut feeling is it comes down to really good quality teaching, but it can sometimes make it even more difficult, even for the good teachers, if you just don't have the physical space. And I think that's where it would come in. And of course, if you happen to be 30 pupils in a science lab, or a lot of pupils in a technology room, or even an IT room, I was in a school this week where basically there was 3 to a computer. Well, that's not a computer lesson. 3 to a computer, everybody on the machine, my way of thinking. But, so it can have some impact, but I think it does come down to the quality of the teaching at the end of the day, more than class size.
Yes, it's sort of a supplementary question to the one you just answered. Under 21st century schools, primary schools have been closed, and obviously the primary schools that remain are at a much greater capacity. What assistance has been given by the LEA and yourselves for the transition into these larger schools?
That's down to the 21st Century Programme, which is governed by Welsh Government and ourselves. As I said, we've reached our targets on a Band A 21st Century schools where we had surplus places, and hence schools, a piece of work was done that the business case was there to close schools. That has not had a knock-on effect on our secondary schools because the surplus places were in our primary schools. Yes. So our secondary schools are fine in that respect. What we will need to look at, obviously, if we get approval on closing our sixth form, those schools with sixth forms, and we're still awaiting approval on that, that could mean that that could help some of our schools that currently have sixth forms. If the move is then to close the sixth forms, they'll have additional spaces within those buildings. Again, we're awaiting Welsh Government approval on that.
Sorry, I was just going to say, but both of you mentioned the word about the quality of teaching. So, if ultimately we want to improve the data, and that's going to be down to, in part, the quality of teaching and teacher assessment and everything else. What are we doing to ensure that we do have that level, that quality of teaching in our schools?
That is basically, the main function of the EAS is school improvement. I'll give you an example of my week so far. Monday, I was in Cwmbran High all day working one-to-one coaching with middle leaders. Tuesday morning I was in Cwmbran High. I'm doing a leadership review in Cwmbran High today and tomorrow. I'm back in Cwmbran High all day Friday working with middle leaders. It's all around the support package where we've identified schools as either red or amber. We are putting a lot of bespoke individual support in, because it's not just about, to be able to improve teaching, you've got to know what it's about at the moment and what good looks like. And one of the biggest issues we're finding, if you look at most secondary schools' recommendations from Eston reports, it's what the buzzword is. Within school variation of middle leaders. Leaders in school actually know what good teaching looks like. Can they recognise it when they see it? And if they don't see it, what are they doing about it? So it's about training them, learning walks effectively, book scrutiny, tying it all together with standards, and then putting bespoke packages in. Because, it would be nice in an ideal world that every school ended up with every single teacher being an excellent teacher. They're not. We work with the staff that we've got, apart from a few exceptions where we go to capability. So there is a huge amount at the moment of bespoke training going on in schools around training up middle leaders and then looking back into what good quality teaching is. We've just reintroduced now, because there are big changes afoot as well. So there's new leadership standards which have come on stream. So it's about implementing all that and making sure that the people in the key positions, and obviously that's every teacher in front of every child, but also about the people who are line managing them, from middle leaders to senior leaders, are all accountable for a specific area and are all doing what they should be. And then when you've got that aligned, standards will take care of themselves.
I presume that's an ongoing process. It's not an intervention for a year or 18 months or 2 years. It's an ongoing and consistent. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's always been about middle leaders since the year dot, isn't it? Has it not? And I'm pleased somebody's finally recognised that. My concern, though, is there's a difference between empowering and supporting and working smart and just getting people to work harder. That's not going to solve anything. So my concern is that the strategies that you actually have outlined to us today is that's fine, but they have to be smartly integrated, not because the danger is here that you just give people more work to do. And if you've got people off on long-term absence with stress, and there are high levels of stress throughout the profession, then the reverse takes place, isn't it? And you're not going to get any improvement. So, I mean, that's why I'm concerned about the term challenge all the time, because it's about supporting colleagues, isn't it? Really. And yes, I mean, there are good teachers, there are great teachers, there are average teachers, but that's just a reflection of life, isn't it? Really. So there are good doctors, great doctors, and average ones. So. What you have to do is you have to work with what you've got, but they need to be actually supported, and many of them are actually feeling pressurised. And the danger that you go into a school and you say this needs to be done, it just cascades down to the poor infantry at the chalk face, and they're the ones that need to have their time managed most effectively of all, aren't they? Really, because they're the ones that need to actually, especially in key core subjects. And what I want to know, really, I suppose, which is measurable, is what difference will your strategies this year have on the year 11, the teacher who's teaching a lot of year 11 kids in English or maths. How will that impact upon them? Will it make them have to do more? Well, they're probably at the end of their tether anyway for many of them, especially the heads of departments. So, no,
they're absolutely flat, and that's the issue. It's the balance. It's the balance between the year 11 and having to go back and develop things. You're absolutely right. I don't disagree with anything you say, because there's a document that's just been released. It's signed up by Welsh Government, Curriculum Council, all the teaching unions and Estin regarding reducing people's workload in school. And the whole idea about this is actually working smarter. I start off my middle leader training with the middle leaders around what can we actually not do. It's about prioritising what's important. Middle leaders are plate spinners, and they're spinning an awful lot of plates. And to be honest, some of them could fall to the floor and you wouldn't even notice. So what's the really important ones? The really important ones is you've got a really good understanding of the quality that every one of your pupils in your subject area, in terms of a lesson, it's about 5 good lessons a day. So anything that doesn't impact on 5 good lessons a day, why are you doing it? Okay? So therefore, what we're actually trying to do is, for instance, mark less, but when you do mark it in a way that actually impacts on pupils' learning. So, the closing the gap marking. So I'm going to mark every piece of work, everything has got to be in detail, but the really important bits that the pupils absolutely need to know and drill, you mark that in detail, and then you go through a process with them, almost a dialogue by ink. And you start to see that happening now. And what staff are telling you is, when they say that they're marking more now than ever, it's because they're still trying to do all the old marking as well, instead of stopping it. And the difficulty is quite often is getting the old traits. Well, you don't need to be doing that. Just stop it. Don't do it. These are the important things. Just do that. It's the same with middle.
That's pleasing to hear, because I don't get that from a lot of colleagues, unfortunately. I mean, I learned far more as a middle leader with 20 years of walking through a classroom than I ever did standing at the back with a clipboard. But that's something that needs to be changed, and unfortunately you need to get some head teachers on board with that, because they're still living in the past in that respect. They think observations is the way of dealing with everything, and it's not.
You're absolutely, and this is why for years we've had a common inspection framework, which basically you went in and you made a judgment and worked in a particular way. The new common inspection framework, because we used to talk about jumping through hoops for Estin, and then these hoops were always additional hoops to what you'd want to do normally. Now, the common inspection framework is just about good practice. And it's moved away from all those sorts of things. So, for instance, yeah, you do book scrutinies, you've got to know what the quality of the work is in the books, but pull 6 pupils in and talk to them about, what have you found difficulty about, right, what did you do with the teacher, what does this mean? Talk to the pupils. And that's what we're doing now. All this raft of training that's going on is all around using these new methodologies to simplify it, but give the people who are really important, i.e. the middle leaders, an easy way in terms of information about, right, we actually need to just change this. That's going fine, but look, if we change it, right, how are we going to change it? We'll have a go at that, and I'm coming back in a month's time in the next learning book to see if it's happened. That is now the processes that are going on in the school. They're not consistent, they're not embedded, and in some schools, it's a shock when we go in. But that is now, I can tell you that if you went into Westmont, Cwmbran High, that's what I've been doing all week in Cwmbran High, is modelling it for the middle leaders to show them how they can just do something in a short space of time and how effective it is. So that's what we're trying to do.
But it's also not just the responsibility of the middle leaders, it's not just the responsibility of the senior leadership of the team, it's down to everybody's responsibility back in the classroom. The classroom is about, the school should be a learning environment, full stop, whether they're in the canteen, whether they're outside, whether it's break time. It's about that continuous learning all the time, and everybody taking accountability of that and being a part of that. It can't just stop in this lesson or with middle leaders. It's down to middle leaders to know what that looks like. They've got to lead. Senior leaders have to lead. It's about the classroom teachers as well, understanding their part. And, it's not accepting mediocre. It's not accepting, my teaching's okay. Sorry, that's not good enough. Our learners deserve better. And especially for some of our learners who need accelerated progress, if your teaching isn't a minimum of good, they won't make that progress. They will slip further behind. Adequate and mediocre and okay is not good enough. And that's about coming back to having a consistent approach. And we haven't cracked it, and I don't think there's such a thing in education as cracking it, because the goalposts are forever moving, whether it be ESTIN, a new framework, or whether it be accountability measures. They'll always change, but that doesn't mean we stop spinning those plates. And we then accept that.
I've never met a teacher who doesn't want the best for their pupils.
No, I disagree there.
Right. I've met some who aren't very good, who could do with some improvement, but most of them are trying their best in difficult circumstances. Well, you know, if you're doing it 43 hours out of 50, damn hard work. So it's easy to sit there and, you know, when you sit above it and say that it's not very good, and that's part of the problem to me, actually, because it's very easy to go in and judge others when you're not aware of the individual circumstances within schools and within classrooms. And my line of questioning is about making it smarter for our colleagues and not just more work, because more work isn't going to have any impact whatsoever, really. It's a zero-sum game then, isn't it, really, race to the bottom. So, and that's the reality of it in schools.
Yeah, I think, you know, the thing is, part of my role is sitting above and having a look, but, you know, the reason I'm sitting above looking down is because I've done it. I've been there, I got the film, I got the T-shirt. You know, I've been 16 years as a head, I've been an executive head, I've taken schools on special, and all those sorts of things. And my work has always been that, it can't be more, it's instead of. It's always about working smarter. Because just simply asking somebody to do something never, ever works. If you want something done, you've got to model it, show them the shortcuts, show them the positives, and I think, a lot of staff actually appreciate when you take the time to model and show them, because, quite often you can be overly critical. Quite often ESTIN can come in and make a judgment that you might not agree with yourself, or wonder where they've got that evidence from, because it's a snapshot in time. What you actually want, though, is a realisation, we are where we are, and how can we improve, and we're in it together. And certainly our approach in the AS has always been, we're in this together. We might just be looking after school improvement, but if those results go down, they're our results. Because every percentage is a pupil. Behind every single figure you look at in that presentation is a pupil sitting behind that. So.
Can I come on to just bring us back and look at the gender differences? We seem to have been looking at this for a long time, and we just haven't seemed to have cracked it yet, have we? We've still got big gaps in the gender. Yeah. Can you tell us what we're doing to try and, sort it out?
Well, when we're looking at intervention, obviously you've got the PDG grant, but it's not just looking at those children within the FSM. It is looking at the whole range of pupils across there, and the intervention won't be just for one particular group. It won't be just boys and girls. You've got a whole range of learners within that, whether they're ALN or whether they're ethnic minority. It's about knowing what the next steps are in their learning, and it almost comes back to that teaching and learning, so that when the teacher is in front of their classroom, that they're aware of these pupils and who they are and what they need to do in the next steps of the learning. And that's where it comes back to middle leaders and senior leaders as well, monitoring every child's progress, looking at groups, looking at trends. And as Julian said, it's very difficult to look at trends now with just this year's data, because you do have to look at it in isolation. But it's looking at the cohort of children within your school as well, and not just boys and girls, and looking then, is there something we need to change in the curriculum for them? Is it boy heavy? Is it girl heavy? Within the constraints of the curriculum. It's looking at as you said earlier, it's looking beyond that school community to see, well, what's it like in other schools? What's working really well there? And bringing that learning back into the schools and sharing good practice.
But the gender gaps here are wider than some parts of Wales. So, what are we doing about it as an authority?
No, I think, look, it's not a case of what are you doing about it as an authority. It's just some things come down to purely, you know, if there's more, predominantly more boys in one year group, that can skew your figures. If you've got small year groups, each pupil is a bigger percentage, you know, so within a school. So it is a bit of a movable feast. But ultimately, it does come back to us a lot of what we've been talking about earlier on with the skills as well. Because, interestingly, it's the boys who tend to have the lower reading abilities, the lower sort of technical accuracy in their writing, because quite often you look at where you can split the English down into the oracy, the reading and the writing, and then if you start to unpick the gender gaps in that, quite often it'll come down to boys writing or boys reading, or a combination of both, and then it's about targeting those at an early enough age to make the impact. So in some aspects you can actually do something about it. So if you identified, for instance, if I was the head of a school in Torfaen now and I identified that I've got a particularly, you know, most of my cohort in year 8 is predominantly boys, out of those there's a significant number who are weak readers, then basically the school needs then to put the intervention into those boys in year 8 if you're going to address the gender imbalance. But at the same, you know, so it's an element of individual schools highlighting where those areas are and putting the interventions in. But then again, that comes back full circle to money. Do they have the money to do that because they're focusing on the year 11? You know, it's a very complex issue, to be fair, Chair. And it's a perfect point to make that, you know, the gender gap is bigger in some areas than others. There is not a magic bullet for that, unfortunately. Well, there isn't one that I know of.
Can I just ask them, we don't seem to be making any progress on closing that gap. Have we looked at any other authorities or any other sort of strategies to help us with that?
I think a lot of authorities, in fact the majority of authorities struggle with this across Wales, whether you're a rural authority or like us, you know, a very sort of urban authority. And there are intervention strategies, some are more effective than others, you know, about when you put intervention strategies in. And I suppose it's about how do you get all schools to engage positively at a young enough age, you know, to bring about or redress the imbalance, if you like, because it does come down to skills. Because when, you know, they come up into the secondary schools, if the gap is already there. Well, in fact, the gap is there when they enter primary schools. You look at statistical figures across not just Wales but the United Kingdom. The gap is there when they enter primary these age. So. And then that tends to almost perpetuate itself through into secondary, and it just needs somebody to be able to afford to implement the correct strategies.
Go back on that then. So that you're saying then the primaries. So we need to be taking it back further than that, and looking at early interventions there.
Absolutely.
But shouldn't we be looking at that?
It's not just about gender gap. It's working with our primaries to put in those key skills at primary level, so that when they get to secondary level, whether they are gender or whether they are FSM or whatever group they fall in, so that every learner gets where they should be, gets those skills back in primary, working then through clusters so that when at secondary school, that the secondary schools builds on those, and then it removes the intervention. It's getting that intervention earlier. So as Julian said, at Key Stage 4, the money's tight. We can't keep doing intervention at Key Stage 4. It's not working. It's too. We need to address it sooner at Key Stage 3, but even at Key Stage 2, and that's, it's a work in progress. Our clusters are much, much better now, working across phases with Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. It's an improving picture. We haven't cracked it, but it's getting much better, and it's about continuing that journey.
Sorry if you just come in there. Keep hearing the word intervention and stepping in here and stepping in there to address some of these problems. I mean, historically it's always been boys with English. How do you get boys to read? How do you get them to write better? But isn't there, apart from interventions in school, a case for using maybe outside expertise, coming into schools, finding a way of engaging interest And just to build on that is, taking Westmont as an example, every year they've got a local author that comes in at year 7, works with the pupils to put together an anthology of horror and ghost stories, which seems to be extremely successful, engages a lot of interest, and that then gets published as a book of the best selected stories. Is there more scope for more of that sort of thinking?
I think there is, as Julian said, now that schools are spinning the plate for Key Stage 4, but also now looking at Key Stage 3, that there is far more scope for that to happen. And as I said, it is a work in progress. It is about schools being innovative with it and looking wider within their curriculum. That just because you've got a curriculum, that doesn't mean you're constrained, that you have the constraints. It's about knowing your learners and what switches to switch them on further. And it is about working with primaries, because as Julian said earlier, the primaries, it's one teacher normally in front of a classroom that has them for that year. So the primary teachers get to know their learners pretty well. So it's about that transition then when they go into Key Stage 3, and it's looking at those children that need that enhanced transition, that is taking place, and not just paying lip service to it, whereas we know in some schools that works really well and comes down to year 5, not just leaving it till year 6, but year 5 and year 4, they're working with those schools at secondary schools. So there's a whole load of, it's not just a one-trick pony. It's looking at a whole lot of different things going on in the school that can add value to these learners and giving them the skills they need to succeed. And absolutely, as you said, in year 7, they're there, and especially Westmont, they have their Explore, which is working really well for the pupils. But again, it's that matching back up to the accountability measures at Key Stage 4, because sooner or later that catches up with them. So I think Welsh Government have recognised that as well, and they are looking at the accountability measures. We'll just wait and see how that links into Successful Futures, because that's key to the Donaldson Successful Futures. They recognise the creativity, the innovation. But again, until that's addressed at Key Stage 4, we revert back to those accountability measures.
The point I was trying to make was that, yes, we talk about the classroom and how important that side of it is, but to really engage the pupil experience, you've got to have that little bit extra to get them switched on, like boys with reading. So the point I was making was, it's not just a school using its internal resources, i.e. its teachers, but using outside resources as well, tapping in the community and beyond to actually bring innovation and other ways of getting the core learnings and skills into those pupils. Because it's a sad fact as well of modern schools with budgets, and particularly health and safety now, is you don't get the school trips like you used to, where pupils go out and get an enhanced experience that reinforces what they learn in the classroom. At the end of the day, you can teach the basics all day long, all year long, but if there's nothing back in there, nothing to keep those pupils engaged and their interest in that subject, you're on the hiding for nothing. I don't know if I'm right in saying that.
I think, Chair, just 2 quick points I'd make on that. One is, we're trying now, because of lack of funding, and trying to get schools to work more with schools and share best practice. So, like the idea, if the author coming in has had a real sort of profound impact, who can we share that with so that they can do it, if they can at all. The other thing is, and it is looking forward, and I'll be retired by the time it comes about, but the Successful Futures, the idea of the 6 areas of, they're now called 6 areas of learning and experience, and the idea is, it's not just about the hard data and the knowledge, or it's a balance between that and the skills and the experiences. So you're absolutely right. If you're going to learn to speak French, then go on a trip to France. So,
just going back to my days in school, I was one of the top sets for English, and we went to see a lot of plays. At the end of the day, you can hammer the points in the classroom about grammar, composition, the sentences, but when you actually go out and see it for real and how it works in the real world, then that learning all of a sudden then it all makes sense, and it sticks in there. And then when you get to the exam stage, then you've got the knowledge and the practical side of it all tied up together neatly.
Absolutely, and as Julian says, some of our schools are very good at using a broader resource and not just the learning environment within the school, and it is then about sharing that practice, and as well, not just in Torfaen, but across the region and beyond, because, you know, we do have the M4 corridor, it's not a million miles away, and we do know that some schools even go as far as Llanelli to see various different learnings and what's working well for them, and bringing that back and trying to use it then back at their school.
Councillor Preston.
Thank you. I just want to go back to the data, if I can, and look at the percentage of pupils achieving level 2. So, looking at our 6 secondary schools, all of them seem to have a drop in the percentage of pupils achieving level 2. So, do you think the focus on maths and literacy that we've had has had a negative impact on the other subjects? And taking that into account, should there be a stronger focus? Probably answered this in part earlier, on literacy and numeracy at an earlier stage, so you reap the benefits later on. I do feel sometimes that we are rather proactive rather than reactive, so we put these interventions in at stage 3 and stage 4, when in fact, if we think forward now, future generations build all the rest of it, if we think forward now and start putting some really strong interventions in, key stage 1, even before that, are we going to reap those benefits in sort of 5, 6, 7 years' time?
If I come in on those, the first one, the level 2, just to clarify, the level 2 is 5, or used to be 5 level 2 GCSE equivalents in any subject. Okay? Then you could then play the game if you want to, and it was a game that was played, because level 2, before level 2 inclusive was the main measure. So what you then had is most secondary schools, classic example, you could do BTEC sports science in year 10 and get 2 level 2 equivalents, and then go on to do GCSE PE in year 11. So if you had 38 children all doing that, you suddenly had 38 children who already got 3 level 2 GCSEs at A star to C, without, almost stepping inside a classroom. I know PE goes in the classroom now and again. So what you had is the level 2 game meant that BTECs were crucial, because some BTECs actually gave you 4 qualifications. There's an army entrance qualification you could do. You could march your kids up and down Dumballs Road in Cardiff, and at the end of the day, they came away with 4 level 2s. So, it became a farce at the end of the day. Now, because the new qualification, you can only use 2 BTEC equivalents, of course, all those tricks and games have stopped. You can, as long as it's a GCSE level 2 equivalent in 3, you can have a BTEC one in that. So that's why every school in Wales has done that, because schools, again, they were measured on the level 2, so that's what they did. They maxed out the level 2 by doing BTECs. So the level 2 is, well, to be honest, it's not worth the paper it's written on, if I'm being totally honest. It measures nothing, okay? Moving forward to answer your second part then on the skills, absolutely right. Because the main drive behind all this, and I've, for my sins, been part of a couple of Welsh Government working parties lately on PISA. The big drive is to get Wales, and you can understand the reasons behind it, to perform better in PISA, because it'll draw down more external funding into research in the country and everything, and you can fully understand it. You cannot deny the rationale behind it. So basically, they changed the specs of GCSE English and Science now, and a lot of them, so they were all more skills-based to enable pupils. So now we've got pupils being taught GCSEs, which are closely aligned with PISA-style exams, therefore we should increase that. Then we've had the changes to early entry. I'm going to mention that as well, because the reason of the changes to the early entry, because when you actually break down the PISA figures, it's the top 20% of pupils who are actually underperforming. The rest we're doing fine on compared to all other countries in the world. So it's your top end. So what affects top end performance sometimes? Early entry. No. So now it's from everything is driven by performance in PISA, whether we like it or not. So the skills curriculum is here to stay. I don't disagree with it though, because if you've got good numeracy skills and good literacy skills, so I'm able to communicate effectively, I can read effectively, I can write. Skills that go across the piece, not just for school qualifications, but for employment, for life, for this great, contribution to Wales as a country. So you can't disagree. So you're absolutely right. And only now, genuinely, the literacy numeracy framework was brought in about 3 years ago. And what schools did, they carved it up and said, right, geography, you're going to teach that graph, And then we ended up with home economics teachers teaching Pythagoras because they wanted to get the apple tart absolutely square. What a load of nonsense. I want to know how to make a tart in home economics. So then it's moved away to making it appropriate. And now I genuinely believe we're at a place now. I'm quite excited about it. I know I don't always come across. But I'm really excited by the focus on skills going down back into the primaries and a continuum from the primaries through Key Stage 3 so that when you get to Key Stage 4, they just do it as a matter of course, rather than... And there's always going to be your pupils with additional learning needs or particular backgrounds going to need that additional support, but they will be the targeted pupils, not the majority. And of course, that's going to take time, isn't it? And in the meantime, we are still being hammered as a council, or as an education officer, or as a consortium, or as a school, or as a governor, by your outcomes in the level 2+. So we're trying to burn the candle at both ends. But I agree with what you say, that the skills are crucial, but they are now being put in place and being delivered to, for instance, the Excellence in Teaching framework and the Excellence in Leadership framework that the AS have produced for all schools. That's just been completely redrafted, all based around skills and everything as well. So.
And having those.
Thank you. Just one other point. We've talked a lot today about interventions and quality of teaching and various things, but we've talked about specific groups, free school meals, gender, all those things. What are we doing for our really bright pupils, those pupils that just with a little bit extra can really excel?
And again, they're a group that I think have been overlooked in the past, and that's a piece of work. Oh, sorry. Am I on now? Yes. That's a group that possibly has been overlooked because of the Key Stage 4 measures. It has been getting those C levels, and therefore the focus hasn't been. There is a changing picture there. That's part of my remit in my team plan, is to work with EAS and with the MAT champion to see what can we do now as a local authority and how can we better get more consistent results, because some schools are doing it really well for their +1s, some aren't. So how can we then further support those schools, and what provision is out there to support them?
Yeah, I just think we need to be careful. We need to be careful not to lose, those bright people.
We did make gains this.
The real comforting piece of information around that is the 5A star A measure, and the A's in the core is now an important indicator for all schools. So again, it's moving on with the accountability model, whereas the accountability model first of all focuses on the level 2, then the level 2 inclusive. Now, questions are being asked about your 5A star A performance, which weren't in the past. So, because Welsh Government, have basically been asking the exact same question that you've just asked. What are we doing for our more able? So they are part of the raft of measures, and most organisations now are really focusing on whether it's schools, consortiums or local authority.
Chair, can I just add one more thing I forgot to mention? You talked earlier about that very helpful poster and fan card which was sent out to schools. The problem I've had is a lot of it's sitting in heads offices. A lot of those boxes are still sitting in heads offices and have not been distributed to the staff. One can argue whether that's deliberate or not, but I am slightly concerned that that's, on a very unrepresentative straw poll around the schools in Torvine. That's sort of what I found. So it would be helpful if you went to a staff room and you could see that on the board, see the poster on the board, and those have gone out to individual staff. Yeah. But they're very useful and very helpful stuff. Yeah.
Well, in fact, if you're wondering what you're actually talking about, it's got 9 years. There we are. That's been distributed to every secondary school, well, every school, as an A3 poster, and it's about reducing workload. So you can see it's Estin, it's the Folk Consortia, it's all the teaching unions. It's all the non-teaching unions, Welsh Government, so it's about sort of the do's, the do-nots, and what Estin would actually be asking for. So it's...
Maybe you could, as you go around the schools, you could check to see whether they are actually...
Well, we can certainly ask with those schools where we have those monthly meetings to see whether that has been shared with staff as well.
Absolutely. Torvine Head Teachers meeting.
Yeah.
I have asked that. Yeah. But, no, I agree, because it is about working smarter and not just working harder.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm working hard enough, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, members, if you look at our suggested scrutiny activity there, which is item 3.1, these are the items there that we were focusing on. And I'd just like any comments you have on some of those facts there. First point, review the data and determine whether the target setting within schools is robust and accurate, given that results indicate for the second year a disparity between targets and actual results for some schools. Are we happy that we've looked at that and we feel happy that things are moving forward?
Well, I'm not sure I received they're a bit woolly, but he did have some strategies, but at the end of the day, we're still 2 years down the line. The results have still dropped, haven't they, really? So I thought it was partly answered, in my view. People may think it was
Yeah. I mean, again, it was answered. Is it robust and accurate, given the results indicate the second year disparity between targets and actual results for some schools? Well, obviously it's not robust, because if it was robust, they would be accurate across the board. There wouldn't be the disparity. So, obviously, the working towards that, I just think, is something that needs really close monitoring, really close, and something perhaps we need to continue to look at.
I think that goes back to Councillor Preston's same point that you've made there, that we need, as a committee, you need to be assured that you keep it.
my view is that the challenge advisor sort of knows what he wants to do. Strategically, but operationally, of course, it's whether that can be done, isn't it, really?
Finance and budgets play a big part in that.
Well, yeah. I mean, one way of addressing this problem is to give teachers less classes to teach and more time for preparation, and but that can't be done, can it, really, within financial constraints. It's a difficult question to answer, Chair.
Practice in teaching and learning within our classrooms will be supported to ensure that further changes to the curriculum do not have a negative impact on the future.
Just a bit confused on that one, because in my particular school there's been a huge amount of work on classroom observation. Now I'm hearing that is all out the window and it's all about learning walks, etc. now, so I'm a little bit confused at this point. I don't know if anyone else has got any thoughts on that. What is best practice, etc.?
I think what's known is that observing is not best practice. And there's a lot of research shows that. But the Welsh Government has chosen to ignore that for the last 5 or 6 years. And finally, at least it's acknowledged that just keeping on observing people doesn't actually... You just teach to the observation, don't you, really? So, like you said... Yeah, it's what you do day in, day out that counts, not when somebody comes to see you. So I think that was refreshing that you showed there was a change there, but the problem is, of course, it's just that something else, isn't it? Another strategy now, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the point I was making.
Yeah.
We did cover that very well, didn't we?
Yes.
At the end of the day, the important thing is that the subject of that observation, learning, whatever new strategy might be, is that the person that it's directed towards has the best possible feedback on that to inform their future role in delivering what they've got to the pupils.
Which means that the person doing it must have the skills required to do it, and that's what he was saying, that at least they're starting that now to sort of work with the middle management teams in secondaries anyway to do that.
What Kirsty Young is now driving with the training with the middle and the senior leadership teams.
So I made some notes following your discussions throughout the meeting. There were just one or two other points that you may want to consider or may not. They did raise the issue about initially schools not always having the access to resource materials and trainings when the changes were coming in. So I don't know how you feel, whether you want to make some sort of recommendation that schools have access to that at the earliest possible opportunity and that they are fully supported with any further changes that are coming in. Do you know whether you have any views on that? Or?
It all comes down to budgets, doesn't it?
We know these changes are coming. They're not going to be a surprise. They're not going to be a shock. We know they're coming. So we need, yes, there are budgetary restraints and everything else, but at the bottom of this, there are children, there are pupils. So we need to be able to plan as best we can. And whether that's schools, sharing resources, sharing expertise, whatever it might be, I don't know. We know they're coming, so we've got to plan as best as we can.
Maybe we should be lobbying Welsh Government when they bring in new initiatives that they should fully fund them. That kind of budget should be expected then to fund it from their budget. If they're new initiative and a new scheme,
support budget.
They should support the budget to enable schools in this stereotype.
It was interesting, Chair, that he's talked about schools being unprepared for the new qualifications in English GCSE and Maths GCSE, which is, I thought, I wasn't too sure about that, because, I mean, with any new exam, the exam board always produces specimen papers and it produces a detailed specification, as they call it. So I think that the issue for schools was the time to actually get to grips with the new qualification. That comes back to what we just talked about in terms of preparing people and training, isn't it, really? And there's only, for big things like that, it's only really inset days that you can really address it, isn't it? You know, the 5 you have throughout the year, but often they are already categorised, aren't they, before the start of the year, what you will be doing. So maybe more flexibility is quite helpful for some schools, isn't it, in terms of managing their own inset. They normally prescribe most of the inset days these days for schools.
Did I hear right? There was only one sample paper on the new
Yes.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yes.
That's got to change. It's got to be a proper range of sampling materials, so that people delivering are at least getting a grip of what's required. Otherwise, your results are going to dip.
But that wasn't saying.
That sounds absolutely ludicrous. What are they going to achieve from that?
That wasn't St Trevor, now, was it? So.
Yeah. Just one sample paper. I think that was quite divisory, actually.
It's going to have an effect on the moral of the school, the pupils, because everyone's just going to be thinking, well, what am I actually trying to achieve here? What's the outcome I'm looking to get?
So just going back to what I said and picking up what you've said, you know, we know this is coming, we know these changes are coming, and we're buying in a service from EAS, you know. Are they able to, or should we be ensuring that they are doing all they can to provide the support to school challenge advisors to prepare our schools for those changes?
Point I wanted to make, with the emphasis now on more Welsh in the curriculum and the shortage of Welsh teachers, I wonder whether that's something we should be perhaps lobbying the Assembly to see what they're going to do about that.
Particularly with budgets, yeah.
And obviously we'd like to be perhaps another monitoring report appropriate.
Yeah. I didn't know if you wanted, they were pretty thorough in their responses with regards to gender differences. I didn't know if you wanted to raise anything on that, or additionally you brought up more able and talented pupils, whether you feel that should form a recommendation of some sort.
Yeah, more able and talented. I do have a bit of a concern there that we put all this focus on different groups quite rightly, and I wouldn't want that removed or changed in any sort of way. But at the other end of the scale, then we've got your more able and talented, who are pupils that might excel, you know, might go on to do great things. Who knows, you know? But I do think they deserve the same level of focus.
Sorry. I think it's one thing that didn't come up in this discussion on this attainment and everything is also the importance of schools having linked governors to subjects and Matt as well, more able and talented, because my role is up and I'm sick and I'm a linked governor for that as well. Yeah. Because that is a crucial part of a modern governor's job. If you're not in there asking the questions, and our school has got linked governors for every subject level, so we can go in there, like for example back in September we were present on the meetings we were present for the discussions on the outcomes, which was quite an interesting process. We were actually there with the leader of the department for the subject we were linked for, and we were there to see what they had to say, why has this happened, why has that happened, and all the rest of it. It was very, very important to link governors, something I think should have brought into this, but too late now.
I'm not sure whether I'm entirely satisfied with the answers about the gender the differences in the gender. We've been talking about this for quite a while now, and we don't really seem to have made any progress. So I don't think I'm really happy with the response, and I would still like that to be put down as a
I don't think any response was offered, really. It was just a case of, oh, this is the way it's been.
It was said about early years. Well, if this is identified very early, surely it can be put in
Surely
place.
there's good practice.
I didn't feel, really happy with the response about that.
The forward-thinking stuff as well, I don't know if we can do something around that, but I really feel it's great that we're addressing everything now, but unless we start that serious numeracy and literacy intervention prior to Key Stage 1 even, unless we do that now, we're likely to still be sat around this table in 10 years' time talking about another cohort of children and how we're going to provide interventions at Key Stage 3 and 4, whereas if we can intervene earlier, strongly now, I know again, funding and all the other issues we've got, if we can intervene earlier, that hopefully the conversations we're having in 5 or 10 years' time will be different.
And through the work of the school subcommittee, that has been a theme, Chair, hasn't it? Literacy and numeracy that has been brought up when looking at the primaries. So I think the Chair and that subcommittee is keen to look at some themes of literacy and numeracy in their upcoming meetings. That will then be reported back to you as a full committee, so we can report back on that. Oh, just one more thing. Sharon offered, obviously, the verified data is being released on the 6th of December, and she did say she would send that round to you all in an easier format to understand, perhaps. I don't know whether you have any views as well on the actual report and how we can look at that in the future going forward for you to make it a little simpler for you to understand.
We would welcome Sharon sending around the data for us, please.
Yeah.
Could we perhaps ask that it's a little bit easier to read?
Yeah.
Something like key findings.
Well, yeah, just broken down into the case. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So we will.
Could we also have the option to have the full data as well, as another pay?
I will work with the Chair now and write those up, and I will send them all around to the committee for you to approve before they get passed on for responses.
Okay. 4th January. Okay. We haven't actually decided our topic for the meeting. We are looking at maybe the EAS business plan, but we're still working on that, and that will be confirmed. Okay. Thank you very much for attending. Okay.